When the Persians came knocking, it wasn't just a casual visit. It was part of their grand plan to expand their empire and tighten their grip on the Greek city-states who had been resisting Persian influence for quite some time. King Xerxes I, keen on avenging his father Darius's failed attempt and showing off the might of the Persian Empire, launched a massive campaign to bring Greece under Persian control. In response, the Greek city-states realized they had no choice but to unite. They formed what was known as the Hellenic League, a crucial alliance designed to pool their resources and military might against this overwhelming threat. This wasn't just about throwing together a quick military coalition. It was a delicate web of agreements and negotiations between city-states that often had conflicting interests. Athens, despite its long-standing rivalry with Sparta, recognized that unity was their only chance to fend off the Persian menace. They knew that standing together was their best bet for survival, but that alliance was as fragile as a house of cards in a windstorm. Keeping it from falling apart required painstaking diplomacy and compromise. Each city-state had its own priorities and concerns. Balancing these differences while keeping a united front against the Persian invasion was no small task. One of the biggest issues was deciding who would command the army. Sparta, with its well-learned military reputation, naturally took the lead on land, but Athens wasn't just along for the ride. They played a crucial role with their powerful navy. Their fleet had helped turn the tide in key battles, such as at Salamis, which greatly contributed to the overall Greek strategy. They agreed to combine their resources, which meant sharing troops, supplies, and intelligence. Sparta would lead the land forces while Athens took charge of the navy. But to make this alliance truly effective, they had to ensure their strategies were in sync. Regular communication and joint planning were crucial so that their land and sea operations did step on each other's toes. Sparta and Athens, despite their differences, understood that they had to make this work. There were plenty of internal rivalries and political differences to deal with. Both states had to navigate these rough waters, making the necessary compromises to keep their eyes on the mutual foe. Mardonius, the Persian general, knew that the rugged terrain of Attica wasn't going to do him any favors, especially after learning his lesson from the Battle of Marathon, where Persian forces had struggled on the rough, uneven ground. With that in mind, he decided to pull his troops out of Attica and head to Boeotia, where the land was flat and wide open, the perfect battlefield for his cavalry to shine. Boeotia wasn't just chosen for the terrain. Mardonius was smart enough to pick a spot near Plataea where he could count on the support of Thebes, a Greek city that had thrown in its lot with the Persians. He even went the extra mile, clearing out the trees to build a fortified camp. He wasn't taking any chances. If things didn't go his way, he wanted a solid fallback plan. From there, Pausanias led the allied forces across the passes of Mount Cithaeron, eventually descending onto the plains of Plataea. They set up on higher ground, fully aware that the Persians would struggle to attack them there, especially with their cavalry pretty much nullified by the terrain. When it came to numbers, the Persians had quite the army, somewhere between 90,000 to 120,000 men, with about 5,000 cavalry. The Greek force was no small fry either, at around 80,000 strong. the largest land army the Greeks had ever assembled. They might not have had much in the way of cavalry, but those hoplites were tough as nails, ready to hold the line against whatever the Persians could throw at them. The two armies were staring each other down across the river Asopus, neither one eager to make the first move. They were both trying to size each other up, but the Persians had a bit of a problem on their hands. Their logistics were stretched thin. And Mardonius, the Persian commander, knew that the longer this standoff dragged on, the worse it'd be for him. He could feel the weight of his father's past mistakes bearing down on him, just like Darius before him. Mardonius was dangerously close to overextending his forces. A mistake that could force him to retreat back to Asia, just as his father had been forced to after the Battle of Marathon. A stalemate was not in his best interest. After a few days of this tense standoff, the Greeks made it clear they weren't about to leave their strong positions and march out into that open plain where the Persians could easily pick them off. Mardonius, getting impatient, finally decided to take the initiative. He ordered his entire cavalry to charge the Greek positions, hoping to shake things up. Now, these Persian horsemen were quick, agile, and deadly. They rode back and forth across the field, launching hit-and-run attacks on the Greek lines, looking for any weak spots they could exploit. Their plan was to tempt the Greeks to chase them down into the open, where the Persians could use their mobility and range to their advantage. But the narrow and uneven ground the Greeks had chosen to defend from wasn't exactly cavalry-friendly. The Persians couldn't really get the upper hand like they wanted to. However, the cavalry did manage to find a weak spot where the Megarians were stationed. This part of the battlefield had a bit more open ground, which gave the Persians the chance to concentrate their firepower. They charged in waves, then pulled back, only to rain down spears and arrows on the Megarians, who were stuck in place and couldn't do much to counter. The situation for the Megarians was getting dire. They were taking heavy losses and couldn't hold out much longer. Realizing the danger, the Megarians sent out an urgent call for help. It wasn't long before 300 elite Athenian hoplites, along with a unit of archers, answered the call. They rushed to reinforce the Megarians, and with that, the Greeks managed to hold the line and keep the Persians from breaking through. It was a close call, but the quick response from the Athenians made all the difference. Not long after, the Athenians found themselves locked in a fierce struggle against those fast-moving Persian horsemen. The fighting was intense and relentless, with neither side willing to give an inch. But then, suddenly, a stroke of luck or fate, depending on how you see it, changed everything. The Persian cavalry commander Mecistius was leading the charge when his horse caught an arrow, reared up in agony, and threw him to the ground. In that chaotic moment, the Athenians seized their chance. They swarmed over Mecistius, and despite his desperate fight, they brought him down with a brutal stab through the eye. The death of Mecistius was like lighting a powder keg. The Persians, realizing their commander had fallen, launched a fierce counterattack, desperate to secure his body. But the Athenians were ready. They dug in, fighting with everything they had, and eventually managed to keep the Persians at bay. This small victory sent a wave of confidence rippling through the Greek ranks. It might not have been a major battle, but psychologically, it was a huge boost. a clear sign that they could stand toe-to-toe with the Persians. For the Persian forces, however, losing Mecistius was a heavy blow to their morale. Buoyed by their success, the Greeks decided to press their advantage. They moved further into the plain of Plataea, edging closer to the Asopus River. This new position allowed them to better deploy their formidable phalanx formation and ensure they had access to a nearby spring for water, a crucial resource in the heat of battle. Both armies moved toward each other and took up new positions, with the Spartans and Tegeans holding down the right flank on the edge of the Asopos Ridge, while the Athenians took the left flank up on a hill. Now, in Greek military tradition, the right wing of the phalanx was considered the place of honor. It wasn't just for show. This was the most vulnerable part of the line, the spot that needed the best troops to hold it. The Spartans, given their unmatched military reputation and their leadership role within the alliance, were naturally given the right wing at Plataea. This position wasn't just about honor. It placed them right where the action was likely to be hottest, playing a key role in the battle's outcome. The left wing, though it didn't carry the same prestige as the right, was no less important. The Athenians were given this spot, a move that acknowledged their huge contribution to the war effort, especially after their standout performance at Salamis. It was a smart compromise that kept Athenian pride intact and solidified their position within the coalition. Between the Spartans on the right and the Athenians on the left, their allies took positions on slightly lower ground. These were city-states from all over Greece, Corinth, Megara, Tegea. They were all there, right in the center of the Greek line. While these cities were important players, they didn't carry quite the same weight as Athens and Sparta, so the center was a fitting place for them. On the Persian side, their main force squared off against the Spartans, while the Medizing Greeks, those city-states that had sided with Persia, were set against the Athenians. Now, having these Greek allies fighting alongside the Persians gave them some serious strategic advantages, like access to local resources and knowledge of the terrain. But more than that, it was a blow to Greek morale, a reminder that not all of Greece was united against Persia. It was psychological warfare at its finest, and it made the other Greek city-states think twice about their own loyalties. By holding their positions, the Greeks made sure their supply lines stayed secure. They had access to local resources, especially water, which was absolutely crucial for keeping their troops in fighting shape. Pausanias, the Spartan commander, made the call to stay on the defensive and wait for the Persians to make the first move. It was a smart move. By not rushing into an attack, he let the Persians' logistical problems start to wear them down. Local support was a game-changer for the Greeks at Plataea. The fertile lands of Boeotia meant they didn't need to rely on distant supply lines. Everything they needed was right there. This kept their troops well-fed and battle-ready without the hassle of long-distance logistics. The Greeks knew the terrain like the back of their hand, and they used it to their advantage, positioning themselves on higher ground to safeguard their supplies and keep an eye on the Persians. Water, often overlooked but absolutely crucial, played a pivotal role. The Greeks secured the best sources, including the Asopus River, while the Persians were left scrambling for whatever they could find, their troops suffering as the standoff dragged on. The Greeks had a firm grip on the most reliable sources, forcing the Persians to scrape for water from less secure, distant places. With each passing day, the Persian logistics buckled under the strain. Their supply lines were stretched thin, running all the way back to Thebes, and they had to rely on supplies either shipped in from Asia or taken from the local area, both of which were risky and hard to maintain. And with the Greeks raiding and ambushing them, those supply lines got hit hard, making it even tougher for the Persian army to stay in fighting shape. In the end, the Persians' inability to maintain their resources was a critical factor that started to tip the scales in favor of the Greeks. After 8 days of this tense standoff, with neither side willing to give up their defensive positions, Mardonius decided it was time to take action. Under the cover of night, he sent his cavalry through Mount Cithaeron, aiming to cut off the Greek supply lines from behind. It was a bold move, and it paid off. They quickly stumbled upon a column of Greek transports carrying vital provisions. What followed was nothing short of a massacre. Those Persian horsemen, fueled by frustration, showed no mercy. They slaughtered everything in their path, man and beast alike, then hauled what was left back to the Persian camp. This unexpected victory gave Mardonius a surge of confidence. 2 days later, he unleashed his cavalry again, this time harassing the Greek battle line. The Spartans, who were guarding the mainspring, were momentarily distracted. The Persians took advantage of the lapse, sending a flanking contingent to seize the Gargaphian spring, the Greek army's only source of water. The Persians didn't just capture it, they fouled it, rendering it useless. Now the Greeks found themselves in a desperate situation, cut off from water and under constant pressure from the Persian cavalry. Recognizing the severity of the situation, Pausanias gathered his commanders. They knew they had to retreat to a more defensible position, but the decision to do so at night to avoid the Persian cavalry was where things started to go wrong. When nightfall came, the Persians pulled back, giving the Greeks a window to retreat, but what should have been a coordinated maneuver turned into chaos. The center retreated first, followed by the Athenians on the left, but when Pausanias ordered the Spartans to move, one commander, Amompharetus, outright refused. Amompharetus was furious. He hadn't been consulted, and the idea of retreating from the enemy was an affront to Spartan honor. He declared that Sparta would not flee from barbarians, calling the whole retreat a disgrace. Pausanias tried to reason with him, explaining this was a tactical withdrawal, not a retreat, but Amompharetus wasn't having it. He even picked up a stone, hurled it at Pausanias' feet, and shouted, "With this stone, I vote against fleeing from the strangers." This defiance threw the whole operation into disarray. By dawn, the Persians realized what was happening and moved in to exploit the Greek fragmentation. Pausanias, seeing the danger, had no choice but to move the army without Amompharetus, risking the loss of his entire division. Finally, Amompharetus realized the rest of the Spartans were moving and grudgingly followed suit, leading his men at a slow pace to rejoin the main force. The whole ordeal was a near disaster, a testament to how poor communication and stubbornness can nearly undo even the best laid plans. As the sun rose over the field of Plataea, casting its light on the final day of the battle, Amampharitus finally rejoined the main Greek line. Just as he did, the Persian cavalry, fresh from their night raid, crossed the river and launched a fierce assault on the Spartan positions from all sides. Pausanias, realizing the gravity of the situation, urgently called for the Athenians to come to his aid with everything they had. The Athenians were already charging towards Pausanias, ready to provide crucial support. But the menacing Greeks on the Persian right quickly noticed their approach. These menacing Greeks, who had crossed the river, launched a fierce attack against the Athenians. The clash between the Thebans and the Athenians was brutal, with both sides putting up a fierce fight. Mardonius' decision to rely on the menacing Greeks for key positions against the Athenians was a serious miscalculation. Many of these menacing Greeks were half-hearted in their commitment, caught between their Persian alliance and their Greek heritage. With the Spartans now holding the line against the full force of the Persian cavalry and infantry, Pausanias saw them harassed by the Persian horsemen, while Mardonius' troops crossed the Asopus River. The cavalry, having done their damage, withdrew, waiting to strike again, when the Greek line showed signs of weakness. The Spartans, renowned for their discipline and unmatched training, held firm in their phalanx formation, their endurance and close combat skills proving crucial in this close-quarters battle. This was the critical moment of the most decisive clash in the Second Persian invasion of Greece. The Greeks weathered a relentless barrage of Persian arrows, their heavy armor and large shield fields protecting them from the deadly rain. Clad in their linen thoraxes and bronze breastplates, wielding their long spears and sturdy shields, the Greeks were well prepared. Meanwhile, the Persians, with their wicker shields, cloth armor, and short spears, were at a severe disadvantage. Pausanias patiently awaited the perfect moment. When the Persians had assembled a large, disorganized force in front of his lines, he knew it was time to act. Once the omens were favorable, he gave the order to advance. The Spartan line moved forward in flawless formation, meeting the Persian shield wall head-on. The clash was brutal. The Persians' wicker shields couldn't stand up to the disciplined heavy bronze of the Spartan phalanx. When General Mardonius, mounted on his white horse and fighting at the front, fell to the spear of Spartan soldier Arimnestus, the Persian lines crumbled. The Persians, demoralized by the death of their leader, fled across the Asopus River. The Athenians, fighting with everything they had for their homes and freedom, proved more determined and managed to hold their ground on the left flank. The Athenians pushed hard against the Theban phalanx and emerged victorious. As the Persian forces faltered and their position became increasingly precarious, the Thebans and their allies started to lose heart. Their once coordinated efforts crumbled, and they began to retreat back to Thebes. It was a glorious victory for the Greeks. After the dust settled on the battlefield of Plataea, the Greeks had achieved what Herodotus would later call the most glorious victory ever seen. With the Persian army's might broken, the remaining survivors took refuge within their fortified camp. But the Spartans, though not experts in siege warfare, held the Persians at bay long enough for the Athenians to arrive. When the Athenians breached the camp's walls, the final remnants of the Persian force were swiftly and mercilessly dealt with. The aftermath was a scene of utter devastation for the Persians. Estimates put their casualties between 50,000 and 80,000 men, a staggering loss. The Greeks, on the other hand, sustained comparatively light losses. Fewer than 1,000 hoplites fell, with about half of those casualties coming from the central division that had been ambushed in the final stages of the battle. Among the fallen Greeks was the valiant, if stubborn, Spartan commander Amampharidas, whose refusal to retreat had nearly compromised the entire plan. This victory wasn't just a win. It was a powerful statement. It showcased the prowess of the Greek phalanx, a formation that would come to dominate future battlefields. The defeat of the Persians marked the end of their threat to mainland Greece and ushered in a new era for Hellenic civilization. The Greeks demonstrated that superior armor, weaponry, training, and discipline could turn the tide of battle decisively. In the wake of Plataea, Thebes faced dire consequences for its menacing stance. The city was besieged, its leaders forced to surrender, and the city itself was subjected to harsh, punitive measures. The term menacing became synonymous with betrayal, leading to a long-standing mistrust and division among the Greek states. Though Thebes would later recover, the shadow of its Persian alliance lingered over its reputation. To the Greeks, their triumph at Plataea was seen as a sign of divine favor, especially from Zeus. They celebrated their victory with religious dedications, building temples and offering spoils to the gods, marking the end of one era and the beginning of another in their storied history. Plataea was a textbook of warfare, but its victory didn't last forever. With the Persian threat receding, the unity of the Greek alliance began to unravel. The underlying tensions between Athens and Sparta soon flared up, eventually leading to the Peloponnesian War, a conflict that would reshape the Greek world.